Hey, what's up, guys? Little man with a big opinion here. So, the news stories that I've been kind of fixated on last night and this morning and doing more reading into, it just kind of tells me that as a prepper, I should continue to look for ways to become more self sufficient, investing in myself. Uh, you can kind of think of this as I'm using my GDP and my income, and I'm figuring out, where the funds should go. And unlike our government, I don't get to just keep racking up a credit card to continue to pay for these things. And I don't get to apply for a new credit card to then pay the minimum payments and interest on the old ones and just continue to do that. This stuff has to happen within a budget. So, if you're like me, you should subscribe to this channel because I talk about prepping from a budget friendly mindset. Um, like the video if you enjoy this stuff, dislike it if you don't, share it with a friend or family member. I'm mostly going to talk about shipbuilding in the United States from a commercial standpoint, from a military standpoint. Um, this is one of the few categories that, you know, whether you liked the last president or not, they were, trying to do something about it. The current administration, um, I think, has done a little bit more about it, but we're really not seeing the, you know, insane critical push that I kind of think needs to happen. Uh, the United States produces about 17 ships, large ocean going ships, a year from 8 shipbuilding ports. China's got about 300 shipbuilding ports and they're producing over 1,000 ships a year. South Korea came next. Uh, China had like 53% of ship builds. South Korea was at like 25. Japan was at 19. And I don't think the U.S. was above half a percent. There are current talks going on with Turkey about them producing components of ships for us. So, something the U.S. has done a lot of recently is, hey, you build the Lego pieces, ship them over here, and we'll put the Lego set together. Which is a nice stopgap measure. It's a nice thing for international relationships. They're part of NATO. It's a way to, build trade and, show we're allies. And it helps with some shortfalls in, the short term. Uh, South Korea and Japan are taking shipbuilding workers that we have and rotating them between their country and our country, kind of training them up. Um, Apprenticeship programs have increased from what I was seeing. Uh, I got to sneeze. There's a ship. It's like the Philly. I think it was the Philly shipyards. They have like 1,700 workers. Uh, haven't seen anything in major news talking about how there's 1,200 new apprentices. Uh, so almost doubling the workforce of this, dockyard. It was bought by a Japanese company for $100 million. They've already invested $5 billion. I couldn't really find anything on what new capacity has been built. Uh, but positive sign that at least at this one shipyard, they're almost doubling the employees. With goals in the next, I think they said by the end of 2030, which is a significant amount of time, to go from making, they said, 1 to 1.5 ships a year to 50. I would call that a major increase. We'll see how well it goes. We're going to have 1 to 3 different presidents by then. Mostly, from the military side of things, ships are taking way longer. They canceled a frigate class. Refitting and upgrading ships is a 20-year backlog, which is weird to think that I'd be almost 50 by the time the current backlog was dealt with. And then the U.S. has literally a metric crap ton of natural gas, and we currently have one liquid natural gas tanker, even though we're using close to 50 of them to export this stuff. And it also makes me think, years ago I read an article about the hog industry in Texas and how Europeans really like our wild hog meat. Texas was exporting 5 million something pounds of wild hog. For the most part, it's locals here that'll eat, the small young ones. A lot of people, just eliminate them because they deal with, crops and your other, pasture animals. Most of that meat going over is probably going over on someone else's ship, which from a money standpoint, I'd rather pay shipping costs to someone in the US than France, Spain, China, whatever. So on the domestic side of things, that's why they're ramping this up. There's just revitalization projects all over the place that need to happen, and most of them are going to take 5 to 20 years to start putting a dent in anything. So in the short term, we probably need to look at developing ourselves, because I feel like we don't have as much red tape. That's the individualism, free will in the US, is we can set these infrastructure things in place to start making a difference now. I always mention my fruit tree. And by golly, I'm going to add 2 or 3 more this year. That's an investment that, pears I would like to start seeing in 2 to 3 more years, even if it's 2 or 3 on the tree. The peach tree, that takes 3 to 5 years. If I take care of it really well, it'll yield more quicker. An apple tree is, 8 to 20 before you start to see any apples. Chickens, I've got the coop like 75% built. I still need to build a run and put a fence up so my dog can't mess with them. There's an investment there, and there's 8 to 16 weeks of feeding and taking care of them before you start to see a return on investment. And then there's a couple of years until all of the cost is recouped and now you're in the positive. So all of this is investment that you might not see gains for years, if not decades. Training one of these 1,200 workers, they might not be a good, solid, productive shipbuilding worker for 5 years. then they're in their prime for 10 to 25. And, you hopefully got your investments worth out of them. And they've convinced other people, or we've seen, the strength of this market. So more people are going, I want to be a shipbuilder. Um, I also just don't see a massive drive for that. Uh, you know, I think that's half the point of why we have, state reps. They're representing people in their area, and I don't hear basically anyone talking about, these are the jobs we're creating in my district. Getting the amount of protein you need is kind of difficult. The Walmart Premier Proteins, they do an okay job. Oh, pull up Google News and see if anything else is kind of noteworthy. I care as a human being about, people being taken advantage of, hurt, killed, kidnapped. And this Nancy Guthrie stuff has been all over the news all week. I think mostly because her daughter hosts I think it's Good Morning America. I really didn't know any of these people because I don't really watch morning news stuff. And yeah, it's still the number one article on here. I don't remember if I brought it up, but February 12th, at least in my area, the A&M Forestry Service is giving out 6 trees while supplies last. I'm pretty sure it's not the same day for like every county in Texas, so you should look that one up. And I can't say for certain what other states do. I know other states do like tree giveaways. I just don't know when they happen. Texas is happening in February because we're probably done with big hard freezes. So I imagine a lot of states in the South, this stuff is happening around this time period. As you go further north, you probably have to wait a little bit longer for it to warm up. But hey, free trees, and we have more trees in the U.S. now than we did in the 1900s. And this computer is very, very slow. But like I was reading the prepping forum on Reddit, and someone was talking about, how do people have months and years of food and all this rice and beans? And one person, they worded it not so great, basically saying like, people most definitely can add preps. It's not the most expensive thing in the world to buy a box of MREs every once in a while. And a bunch of people attacked him for it. Like, MREs are expensive. You're speaking from a point of privilege. Most people are just scraping by. And, doing some digging, they're both kind of sort of correct. People in the U.S. are struggling. Lots of people live paycheck to paycheck. I'm not gonna say that I'm, super, super wealthy or super, super poor. I definitely fall in the middle class category. And, the comment I made is a 1 pound bag of rice is 68 cents. If you are struggling to the point where when you go grocery shopping, it's not in your budget for that, then there are more serious issues going on. I've had times where I've paid for stuff with my pocket change. But I also explained, getting better at this is a marathon, not a sprint, and I'd rather get 1% better each day. And so, if you're going grocery shopping every Friday and like you have no way of increasing your income to spend 68 cents on a bag of rice or cutting something else out to get that bag of rice, some soul searching's got to happen. But if you can, at the end of the year, that's 52 pounds of rice. 1 pound bag is about 1,600 calories, so you're sitting at 52-ish days of food. That's like emergency rationings. You're just surviving. You probably hate yourself. It doesn't take into account the water needed to make it, seasonings needed to make it taste better, preparing it, all that kind of stuff. But if you did that for a whole year, I would say you're better prepared than 80% of Americans. I've made videos about spending $10 on 10 items at the dollar store. There are times where I have spent several $100s a month on prepping stuff. And, I have to wait till I get paid to buy oxygen absorbers for the Mylar bags that I have. That way I can put away some of the food that I've gotten recently. The oxygen absorbers are like $15, but I can't just go out and buy them right now. In my ammo video, I talked about I'm perfectly fine buying, 20, 40 rounds at a time, maybe once a month, maybe every 6 weeks. Then waiting till I have $300 or $400 to try to buy, 500 to 1,000 rounds. Because that's how my brain works. I'd rather put a little bit away at a time and spend the $10 than trying to convince my brain to hold on to the $10 until I had enough to bulk buy it. I know buying it in bulk is cheaper and more efficient. You're most likely getting rounds that were made in the same batch. So even if they're slightly off, it's not that big of a deal. All this being said, when I look at what I have, and I can say I've got over a year's worth of food, I was actually getting close to 2 years before I started incorporating my cousin into it, who, moved into the house next door, my grandma's house. I've been putting rice and beans and honey and stuff away since I was 14, 15. First time I saw The Walking Dead. And that was, might have been even younger. I feel like it came out my freshman and sophomore. No, that would have been in middle school. It came out in 2010. And I'm pretty sure we watched it when it first came out. I first started prepping because I thought the zombie apocalypse was going to happen. So that's 16 years ago. And, I have a jar of honey that I filled up from honey packets while I was in high school that I still have. because I read that it was pure honey. I started grabbing 2 or 3 at lunch. Then I convinced my friends to do it. I actually have 2 or 3 jars of this honey uh, that I would get enough to fill up this 4-ounce container, and I just rip packets and fill them up. I still do that when I go to Whataburger. I just don't go as often as I want to, and I only get 3 or 4 packets at a time. I did the same thing with sugar packets too. You know, anytime we went out to eat, I'd grab 2 or 3 of them. And I have a couple of the 16-ounce jars that I've filled up from sugar packets. I've bought rice 1 pound at a time and in 50-pound containers. Beans, same way. Oats, corn. Mountain House meals is the worst. You know, you can simply buy it's like 28 bucks. I remember when they were $19.99. But the 3-day food pail at Walmart. I've gone to food banks before, especially in college when I really needed it. You know, they let you go twice a week. The only requirement was to be a college student. And so that freed up some other money that I was spending on food and, you know, let me buy other things. You got to start somewhere. You got to plan a budget. And, you know, a little goes a long way. If you started today and 5 years from now nothing terrible happened, you'd probably be better prepared than 90% of Americans. But I think I rambled on long enough. Talk to your representatives. See if you can convince them to, you know, push more for manufacturing in the U.S. Subscribe to the channel. Share it with everyone you know. Like or dislike. Leave your comments. Do all those things. And I'll catch you in the next one.